If you're ready for a story that'll touch your heart and show you what real courage looks like, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. You won't want to miss what happens next. The wind howled across the Montana plains like a banshee that October evening in 1887, rattling the shutters of my cabin and sending tumbleweeds dancing past my windows. I'd been living alone on my homestead for near on 3 years, content with the company of my cattle and the occasional visit from old Pete, who ran the general store in town 15 miles south. That's when I heard a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness symphony I'd grown accustomed to. A baby's cry. I set down my coffee cup, the bitter liquid still steaming in the cold air that seemed to seep through every crack in my log walls. The crying came again, thin and desperate, carried on the wind like a prayer. I grabbed my rifle, man couldn't be too careful in these parts, and stepped onto my porch. The sight that greeted me nearly knocked me backward. A young woman sat hunched against my fence post, clutching a bundle to her chest. Her dress, once probably blue, was now the color of dust and desperation. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a face that couldn't have seen more than 25 summers, though the lines around her eyes spoke of sorrows beyond her years. "Ma'am," I called out, lowering my rifle. "You all right?" She looked up at me, with eyes the color of storm clouds, and I saw something there that made my chest tighten. Fear, yes, but also a fierce determination that reminded me of a cornered wildcat. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "My baby, ... She's so hungry, and I don't know where else to go." I'd always been a solitary man. After losing my Sarah to the fever 5 years back, I'd chosen this isolated life, building my cabin far from town, far from the pitying looks and well-meaning but empty words. But something about this woman's desperation cut through the walls I'd built around my heart. "Come inside," I said, stepping down from the porch. "Both of you." She struggled to stand, her legs shaking like a newborn calf's. I reached out to help her, and she flinched away instinctively before allowing me to steady her arm. The babia, little girl, I could see now, was wrapped in what had once been a fine shawl, but was now threadbare and stained. Inside my cabin, the warmth from the stone fireplace seemed to bring her back to life. She sat in the chair I offered, cradling her daughter with a tenderness that spoke of a love deeper than the canyon that split the land to the west. "When did you last eat?" I asked, already moving toward my pantry. "2 days ago," she whispered, then quickly added, "But the baby, she needs milk, and I can single quotes, ... I understood. The woman was starving, and a starving mother couldn't feed her child. I heated some milk from my cow, Bessie, and prepared a simple meal of beans and hardtack. As she ate, I learned her story. Her name was Catherine Morrison, and she'd been married to a man named James, who'd died in a mining accident near Butte 3 months prior. She'd tried to stay in the mining town, but without her husband's income, she couldn't afford rent. The company had given her a week to clear out of their housing. "I walked from town to town," she said, her voice growing stronger with each spoonful, "of food, looking for work, for someone who might take us in. But everywhere I went, they'd see the baby, and..." She shrugged, a gesture that held more pain than words could convey. I knew the story well enough. A young widow with a child was seen as a burden, a liability. People had their own struggles, their own families to feed. Charity was a luxury few could afford in these harsh lands. "Where were you heading?" I asked. "Nowhere," she admitted. "I was just ... walking, hoping, praying that someone, somewhere, might show us kindness. The baby stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds that filled the quiet spaces between our words. I watched Catherine's face as she looked down at her daughter, and I saw something there that I recognized the same. Fierce love I'd seen in Sarah's eyes when she'd talk about the children we'd never had. "You can stay the night," I heard myself saying, "both of you. It's not safe to be traveling in this weather." The relief that washed over her face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." "No need for that talk," I said gruffly, suddenly uncomfortable with the emotion in the room. "I'll set up a bed for you in the back room. Morning comes early on a ranch." As I prepared the small room that had served as my storage space, I couldn't help but think about Sarah. She would have loved this, having a baby in the house, a woman to talk to. Sarah had always said I was too kind for my own good, that I'd give away my last dollar to help someone in need. Maybe she was right. That night, I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of life in my cabin, the soft breathing of the woman and child, the creaking of the old wood as it settled, the whisper of wind through the eaves. For the first time in 3 years, my home didn't feel empty. I woke before dawn, as was my habit, to the sound of the baby crying. For a moment, I lay still, listening to Catherine's gentle voice as she tried to soothe her daughter. The walls of my cabin were thin, and I could hear her soft singing a lullaby that sounded like something from the old country, all rolling, consonants and gentle melody. When I emerged from my room, I found Catherine sitting by the dying fire, the baby at her breast. She looked up with embarrassment, starting to cover herself. "Don't mind me," I said, turning to stoke the fire. "I had a wife once. These things don't bother me." She relaxed slightly, settling back into the chair. "Your wife, is she fever?" "Took her," I said simply. 5 years back. I'm sorry. So am I." I added fresh wood to the fire, watching the flames catch and dance. "What's your little one's name?" "Emma," Catherine said, her voice soft with love. "She's 4 months old." Emma. It was a good name, strong and simple. I found myself looking at the baby more closely. She had her mother's dark hair, but bright blue, eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with curious intensity. "She's beautiful," I said, and meant it. Catherine smiled for the first time since I'd found her. It transformed her face, chasing away the lines of worry and exhaustion. "She looks like her father. He had those same blue eyes." I prepared breakfast eggs from my chickens, bacon from a hog I'd slaughtered the month before, and fresh bread I'd baked every few days. As Catherine ate, I could see color returning to her cheeks. The baby seemed stronger too, more alert. "I should be going," Catherine said as she finished her meal. "You've been more than kind, but I don't want to impose." "Where will you go?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe try the next town over. Maybe someone there." "No," I said, the word coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. "I mean, winter's coming. You can see it in the way the animals are acting, the way the wind's changed. It's going to be a hard one." Catherine looked at me with those storm cloud eyes. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to change both our lives. "Stay through the winter. Help me with the cooking, the cleaning. Provide for you and the baby. I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering." I stood up, suddenly needing to move, to do something with my hands. "Look, I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. But that baby of yours, she needs a roof over her head and food in her belly. And you need time to figure out what comes next." Catherine was quiet for so long I thought she might refuse. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why would you help us? You don't even know us." I thought about that question, really thought about it. Why was I doing this? Maybe it was because I'd seen too much hardship in my life, too many people who needed help and got turned away. Maybe it was because Sarah would have wanted me to. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in 3 years, I'd woken up to sounds of life in my house instead of the hollow silence of my own breathing. "I guess," I said finally, "because it's the right thing to do." The days that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Catherine proved to be a capable worker, taking over the cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that made my bachelor existence seem shabby by comparison. She mended my clothes, organized my scattered possessions, and filled my cabin with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Emma grew stronger each day, her cries less frequent, her smiles more common. I found myself looking forward to the evenings when Catherine would sit by the fire, the baby in her lap, and tell stories about her life before her childhood in Pennsylvania. Her courtship with James, their dreams of making a life in the West. He was a good man, she told me one evening as the wind howled outside. Hard-working, honest. He believed in the future, in the idea that out here, a man could make something of himself. And now, she was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on Emma's blanket. Now I'm not sure what I believe, but I know I have to keep going, for her. I understood that kind of determination. After Sarah died, I'd felt like giving up more times than I could count. But something had kept me going, maybe stubbornness, maybe hope, maybe just the simple fact that life has a way of continuing whether we want it to or not. The first snow came in November, earlier than usual. I watched Catherine's face as she stood at the window, Emma in her arms, watching the white flakes drift down like feathers from a torn pillow. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's dangerous," I replied. "That snow means we're locked in here until spring. No going to town, no getting supplies we don't already have." She turned to look at me, and I saw something new in her eyes, not fear, but understanding. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," I said, surprised by how quickly and certainly the answer came. "Are you?" She smiled, and I realized that smile was becoming something I looked forward to seeing. "No," she said, "I'm not." That night, as I lay in my bed, listening to the snow tap against my windows, I thought about how much my life had changed. 2 months ago, I'd been a man content with solitude, satisfied with the company of my animals and the occasional conversation with old Pete. Now, I was sharing my home with a woman and her child, and the strangest part was how natural it felt. But I also knew that winter was just beginning, and the real test of our arrangement was yet to come. December brought with it a blizzard, the likes of which I hadn't seen in a decade. The snow piled up against my cabin walls like white mountains, and the wind screamed across the plains with a fury that seemed personal. For 3 days, we couldn't even see the barn from the house, let alone venture outside to tend to the animals. I'd prepared for this kind of weather. My root cellar was stocked with preserved meat, vegetables, and grain. My woodpile was tall, enough to last through the harshest winter. But I hadn't prepared for the intimacy that came with being trapped in close quarters with Catherine and Emma. The baby had grown restless in the confined space, crying more frequently. Catherine tried everything, singing, rocking, walking the small length of the cabin, but nothing seemed to calm. Emma's fussing. By the second day, I could see the exhaustion wearing on Catherine's face. "Here," I said, reaching for the baby. "Let me try." Catherine hesitated, then handed Emma over. The child felt impossibly small in my large hands, but there was something about her weight, her warmth, that felt familiar. I began to hum an old song Sarah used to sing while she worked in the garden. To my surprise, Emma's cries gradually subsided. "How did you know to do that?" Catherine asked, settling back into her chair with relief. "My Sarah used to sing to the animals when they were birthing," I said, still humming softly. "Said it calmed them. Figured it might work on babies too." Catherine watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're a good man, John," she said quietly. "John." She'd been calling me Mr. Hartwell since she'd arrived, maintaining the formal distance that seemed appropriate for our arrangement. Hearing my first name from her lips stirred something in me I'd thought long buried. "I'm just doing what needs doing," I said. But the words felt hollow even to me. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind a world transformed. By snow, everything was white and clean and silent, as if the earth had been holding its breath. I spent the morning digging us out, creating paths to the barn and the outhouse, checking on the animals that had weathered the storm in their shelter. Catherine stood in the doorway, Emma in her arms, watching me work. "It's beautiful," she said when I came back inside, stomping snow off my boots. "It's treacherous," I corrected. "Pretty to look at, but it'll kill you if you're not careful." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Like a lot of things, I suppose." That evening, as we sat by the fire, Catherine told me about the night James died. She'd been waiting for him to come home from the mine, Emma crying in her arms, when the mine supervisor came to their door. There had been a cave-in, he'd said. 3 men were trapped. By the time they dug them out, it was too late. "I keep thinking about that last morning," she said, her voice distant. "He kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, same as every day. If I'd known it was the last time, I would have held him longer." "You couldn't have known," I said. "No," she agreed. "But that doesn't make it easier." I understood that kind of regret. I'd felt it myself every day since Sarah died. The things unsaid, the moments untaken, the assumption that there would always be tomorrow. Sarah and I talked about having children. I found myself saying, she wanted a whole house full of them. Said the cabin would be too quiet without little voices filling it up. Catherine looked at me, then at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully. In her makeshift cradle, she would have loved Emma. "Yes," I said. She would have. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed listening to the wind and thinking about the strange turns life takes. 6 months ago, I'd been a man convinced that his life was over, that the best parts of it lay buried in the cemetery 15 miles away. Now, I was sharing my home with a woman and child who'd become more important to me than I'd ever expected, but I also knew that spring would come, and with it, decisions that would change everything. The next morning, I found Catherine in the kitchen, making breakfast. Emma was in her high chair, a simple wooden contraption I'd built the week before, banging a spoon against the tray and laughing. The sound of that laughter filled the cabin with something I hadn't heard in years. Joy. "She's in a good mood today," I observed. "She likes it here," Catherine said, not looking at me. "She's settled." There was something in her voice, a weight I hadn't heard before. "What's troubling you?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. then set down the spatula she'd been using to flip eggs. "Spring will come," she said finally. "Yes, it will. And when it does, I'll need to figure out what comes next, for both of us." I nodded, understanding the unspoken question. Our arrangement had been temporary from the beginning, a way to get through the winter. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more for me, at least. "You could stay," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Catherine looked at me with those storm cloud eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this works, us, here, together. You're a good mother, a good woman, Emma's happy, and I paused, searching for the right words. "I'm not the same man I was when you arrived. I'm better, John, ... I'm not asking you to marry me," I said quickly. "I'm just saying you don't have to leave. You could stay, raise Emma here. I'd provide for you both, protect you both." Catherine was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I need time to think, of course." But I could see in her eyes that she was already thinking, already weighing the safety and security I offered against something else, something I couldn't name but could feel in the space between us. February brought with it the first hints of spring's approach. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath like promises of life to come. The days grew longer, and I found myself spending more time outside. Preparing for the season's work, Catherine had grown quieter since our conversation about staying, but not in a way that suggested unhappiness. She seemed to be thinking, weighing options, planning for a future that had suddenly become more complex than simple survival. Emma had grown remarkably in the months since their arrival. She was sitting up on her own now, babbling constantly, reaching for everything within her grasp. She'd learned to recognize me, smiling when I came into the room, reaching for me when I sat near her chair. "She thinks you're her father," Catherine said one evening as I played with Emma, making faces that sent her into fits of giggles. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were untrue, but because they were truer than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. Somewhere in the long winter nights, I'd begun to think of Emma as my daughter, of Catherine as something more than a guest in my home. Would that be so terrible? I asked. Catherine looked at me with those eyes that had grown so familiar, so dear. "No," she said quietly. "It wouldn't be terrible at all." That night, she came to my room. I was lying in bed, listening to the wind in the eaves, when I heard her soft footsteps in the hallway. She knocked gently on my door, and when I opened it, she stood there in her nightgown, Emma sleeping in her arms. "She's been fussing," Catherine said. "I thought maybe she'd sleep better near you." I understood. Emma had grown used to my presence, to my voice. In the small cabin, she could hear me breathing, moving around, and it comforted her. "Bring her in," I said. Catherine settled into the chair by my window, Emma in her lap. The baby settled immediately, her breathing growing deep and regular. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight play across the snow outside. "I've been thinking about what you said," Catherine said finally, "about staying." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. "I know you're not asking me to marry you," she continued, "but I need to know, is that what you want?" Eventually, I thought about that question, really thought about it. Did I want to marry Catherine? The answer came to me with surprising clarity. "Yes," I said, "I do." She was quiet for a moment. "I loved James," she said. "I loved him with everything I had, but he's gone, and I'm not. Emma's not. We're here, and we're alive, and we deserve to be happy. And are you happy?" She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Yes," she said, "I am." "Then stay," I said. "Stay and marry me. Let me be Emma's father. Let me be your husband." Catherine stood up, still holding Emma, and crossed to where I sat on the edge of my bed. She leaned down and kissed me, soft and gentle and full of promise. "Yes," she whispered against my lips. "Yes, spring came early that year, and with it, old Pete from the general store making his first visit since the snows had melted. He was surprised to find Catherine and Emma in my cabin, but not disapproving. Pete had always been a practical man, and he could see that the arrangement worked. Planning to make this official, he asked as we sat on my porch, watching Catherine hang laundry while Emma played in the grass at her feet. "Already have," I said, showing him the ring I'd carved from a piece of oak. "Asked her last week. She said yes." Pete grinned. "About time. You found yourself a good woman again." Sarah would have approved. I looked at Catherine, hanging my shirts next to her dresses on the line, and knew he was right. Sarah would have loved Catherine, would have adored Emma. She would have been happy that I'd found love again, that I'd found a way to fill the cabin with the sounds of family she'd always dreamed of. "We're planning a simple ceremony," I said. "Just something small. Will you stand up for me?" "Be honored to," Pete said that evening. As I tucked Emma into the crib I'd built for her, she grabbed my finger with her tiny hand and held on tight. Catherine came up behind me, slipping her arms around my waist. "No regrets?" she asked. I thought about the question, about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, I'd been a man alone, convinced that my life was over. Now, I was about to become a husband again, a father for the first time, a man with a future full of possibilities. "No regrets," I said, and meant it. The wedding was small, just Pete, the preacher from town, and the three of us. Catherine wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, and I wore my best shirt and pants. Emma gurgled happily in Pete's arms during the ceremony, as if she understood that this was the moment our makeshift family became real. As we exchanged vows under the wide Montana sky, I thought about the strange ways life works. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. Sometimes a stranger at your door isn't a burden, but a blessing. Catherine took my name that day, and I took hers and Emma's. Hearts. We became the Hartwell family, bound not just by law, but by love, by choice, by the understanding that some bonds are stronger than blood. That night, as I lay in bed beside my wife, listening to our daughter's soft breathing from her crib, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Outside, the wind still howled across the plains, but inside our cabin, there was warmth and love and the promise of tomorrow. Catherine had been right, we were alive, and we deserved to be happy. And in that moment, as sleep began to claim me, I knew we would be. Years later, when Emma was old enough to ask about her real father, Catherine would tell her about James, about his kindness, his dreams, his love for her. But she would also tell her about the winter day when a stranger gave them both a home, and how sometimes the family you choose is just as real as the family you're born into. And I would tell her about the day her mother appeared at my door, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known I was praying, and how love, real love, has a way of finding you when you need it most. The wind still howls across the Montana plains, but it no longer sounds lonely to me. It sounds like home. If this story touched your heart the way it did mine, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Stories like this remind us that kindness can change lives, that second chances exist, and that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that will move you, and hit that like button if you believe in the power of compassion. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them.